Is it lawful to do good on the Sabbath or to kill? Choose life that you may live. That, from Deuteronomy 30, is one of the most important phrases and interpretations of the law within Judaism. Choose life that you may live. It is God's call to the people to say, I have set before you life and death. Choose life that you and all of those who descend from you may live. Choose life that you may live. And yet, Jesus has to ask the question, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath? Is it lawful to bring life? And he's met with silence. His opponents, the people who are observing his ministry and seeing this crowds that are following him everywhere, tax collectors, sinners, two groups of people who actually don't sit together very often. I don't think we realize that when we read these stories. Tax collectors were often those very people who took money, collected taxes on behalf of the government, and then, took a little bit for themselves. They set up the rules, they set up the laws, they made themselves wealthy by incurring debt on behalf of other people. They created debt. They created debt, and in this society, if you were in debt, it was probably seen as a kind of sin, a kind of thing that you owed. You were farther down the scale. And so tax collectors took advantage of the most vulnerable people, the people they could twist and turn the laws and the rules and gather from. And so the idea that tax collectors and sinners, very likely people who had been taken advantage of by people like Levi, are sitting together at a table is outrageous. It's a threat. All of these people are following Jesus, and people who are unlike one another, people who typically are pitted against one another to maintain a kind of order in the world around them, they are sitting and eating together. This person, this Jesus, is a threat because he is overturning the way that the world seems to work or should work. He's threatening people who know where their power comes from, who knows what their authority is, who knows what their job is. He's threatening that. He's threatening their security with the state, their security with their religious authorities and friends, their security in their own jobs. People are getting up and leaving their families and their work to follow this man. And so people are threatened by Jesus. And Jesus, typical of Jesus, gets right to the heart of the issue. Are you threatened by me because I am choosing life? And when he asks that question and is met with silence, is because they know the answer to the question. The answer is choose life. The answer is the Sabbath is made for humankind. The answer is God has constructed all of these laws and all of these practices so that people can flourish. They can have life. When Jesus makes this reference to the Sabbath over and over and over again, the Sabbath is this point of contention and conflict. He's speaking of a day set aside primarily because, one, God rested on the Sabbath. God creates in 6 days, and then God takes a break and says all of creation gets to rest with me. In a world where nobody rested from labor, in a world of subsistence living where labor was required to survive, in a world where labor was demanded by those who had more power and more money than you and wanted what you produced from your labor, to set aside a day is revolutionary. That is the ancient practice of Judaism. Because God rested, we get to rest. All of creation gets to rest. And the second reason is because that reminder of rest is also a reminder that God is a God of liberation. Over and over and over again, when the Sabbath is referred to in Hebrew scriptures, it is often referred to, and the phrase that comes after it is, because I was the God who rescued your people from Egypt. Over and over and over again, Jews are reminded that their God is a God of freedom, of liberation, a God who rescues people out of slavery. The whole practice of the Sabbath is something that slaves don't get an option to do. You don't get the option to rest, whether your master is a slave or a boss in a 7-day work week. You don't get that option if you have to show up for work. If you don't get vacation time, you don't get to rest. But the God of liberation is a God who recognizes we need rest. We need time to set aside, because that is a part of our life, right? It's not only done because God is a God of freedom and liberation. It is because resting, setting aside time to enjoy one another and the beauty of God's creation, that is a part of our flourishing. That makes us alive. That is the healing that we need. The Sabbath was so important that not only do you rest once a week, you rest once every 5 years. There is a command that the fields will lie fallow for a year, every 7 years. Everybody gets a break from the labor of maintaining and harvesting every 7 years, including your slaves. And then every 50 years, which is 7 times 7, plus that little extra year tagged on, every 50 years, everything in the world around is supposed to reset. Okay, so God gives land to the people for their flourishing, right? In a world where people depended on farming and on pasturing and raising cattle and sheep, where they depended on that for their livelihood, land was absolutely essential. And every family is given a piece of land, right? Every family actually gets their 3 acres and a mule. Every family gets that. But we all know what happens. Sometimes someone's actually not a very good farmer and they just make some really bad decisions and they plant the wrong crop and it doesn't grow. Maybe it's because they thought, oh, this newfangled crop will be great. It doesn't grow and they lose their land, right? They can't pay for the seeds that they planted. They've got nothing to sell. So they sell it to their neighbor and say, look, we'll stay here and work for you. Or maybe it was a really bad year for the weather, right? Everybody's crops were devastated. And so some guy who's got a little bit more money, maybe he's stocked up a little bit, he buys the land. And all of a sudden those people go from being owners to being workers on the land. And sometimes they become slaves. We know that that's how people work. We know that we don't always control the things that we own. We don't always control the ability to care for our families. But God gave creation, all of creation, so that we could flourish, that we could care for one another in our families, in our communities. And so every 50 years, according to the law, there is a societal Sabbath. It's called the year of Jubilee. And all the economics, they reset themselves. Land is supposed to go back to the families for whom it was originally given by God. Debt dismissed. Slaves set free. Everything is supposed to reset itself every 50 years. Notice that's about a generation, right? A generation to make sure that every family, every generation can care for themselves and their loved ones. That's how the world is supposed to work. That's how God set it up. That all of this creation is for all of our benefit, for all of our flourishing, for all of our life, for all of our joy. And sometimes when we mess that up, when we create debt and debtors, when we put people in prison, when we enslave them, we are supposed to reset that. That is behind this conversation of the Sabbath. We tend to think of the Sabbath as the day to go to church and have brunch. But the Sabbath is a resetting of the whole creation to remind us that we are to choose life so that we might live. Sometimes we need that reset. Maybe we need that reset in our economic dealings. I certainly think the practice of Jubilee, something that the Poor People's Campaign has talked about, that practice of Jubilee would be good for our world. We don't actually know if Israel ever practiced Jubilee. We have no idea. There's no evidence. There's no historical record of it because you know what? It's hard. No one wants to give back land that they have. No one wants to reset their power and their privilege. No one wants to give up what they have earned through shrewd dealings or good weather, or not clear how we earn things through good weather, but we are certainly willing to claim that. This reset, it is a threat to the world and the structures that make us comfortable, that make us able to own and to buy and to sell with impunity, that support the life that we have. And it's built into the way God structures society, right? The call of the Jewish people is to be a people that always remembers a God of freedom and liberation, a God who wants to reset so that we may all live. And we struggle with that reset. It's not just the Pharisees and the Herodians who don't like it. It's not just the Pharisees and the Herodians who are silent in the face of the question, is it lawful to heal or to kill on the Sabbath? We are silent about all sorts of things in the world around us. And that silence is always complicity with the people who are powerful. We're silent in the church. We know that horrible things have happened in the church and we don't talk about it. It's better to sweep it under the rug, to push it away, to just not talk about it because we don't want to upset one another, right? We don't want to have to revisit all of those awful feelings. And yet that also means we don't reset. We don't reset how we do things and how we love one another. I don't think COVID is a pandemic given by God. I don't believe that God visits suffering on us so that we can learn a lesson. I do believe that suffering exists in the world and we have the opportunity to learn from that. And so my question, the question I think a lot of people are asking is, how do we reset? What are the ways in which we as individuals and as communities are silent in the face of that question? Is it lawful to heal or to kill? We know the answer. We know that the answer is to do good. We know that the answer is to choose life. And yet choosing life is hard. Juneteenth is a great example. It took the enforcement of a military to implement a law written in, and a proclamation written into law over 2 years before. It took the enforcement of a military group to make that happen. And as has been pointed out, Juneteenth, the danger of it becoming a Hallmark holiday, will suddenly shift us into ignoring the ways that we as a culture are still silent in the face of that question, is it lawful to choose life or to kill? Our silence, wherever it's at, our refusal to see, is itself an answer to that question. And it is not the answer that as a church we are called to. And so ask the question over the next set of weeks and months, what does it mean for us to reset? I'm not sure. I don't know what the answer to that question is, because the best answers come from a group. But what does it mean for us to say clearly and with conviction, we choose life? Amen.